everybody. Welcome to Artist Talk by Oliver Ressler. We are very glad as an artwork gallery to exhibit his artwork because we are not a gallery in traditional sense. We are outdoor, we are open air gallery. The gallery you will find on embankment of Vltava. So in case you just continue this street along, on the right side you come to the Vltava on the left side, and on the right side is our gallery. It looks like this. So there are niches in the supportive structural wall of the Letna Park. And therefore, because it's situated very central and it's very visible, the niches are 4 meters high, so it's really large formats. We communicate with a very wide audience, and we always try to bring very actual topic. So usually it's social and political topics what we exhibit in Art Wall. And nowadays, one of the hottest, most discussed topics is, of course, refugee crisis, and also the question of our responsibility to solve this refugee crisis. So our share of responsibility on the whole issue. And I think like Oliver's artwork very well communicates exactly this message. So now I give a word to Oliver to introduce the Art Wall exhibition, also a bit of more of your artworks.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. So I will use this talk to present the project I'm doing at Art Wall Gallery. And also to contextualize it a bit within the body of work I did over the last 17, 18 years dealing with migration, racism, and issues like this. So my work in general focuses on themes that you could consider as large themes like capitalism, ecological issues like global warming, migration or racism, alternatives to capitalism, and various forms of resistance. So many of my works are somehow connected to social movements. So I will present maybe 5 or 6 works here. All of them somehow deal to migration or racism. And then I will finish the presentation here with presenting an 18-minute long film called The Rite of Passage from 2013, which is a collaboration with the Australian artist Sunny Beck. And it's dealing with citizenship and the discourses for a global citizenship. So on the Art Wall Gallery, the gallery consists of 7 panels. And all of these 7 panels, they show images like this. So a beach, an empty beach, and then you see images of people lying on the beach. They are seemingly dead, or at least they do not move or anything. And if you think about dead people lying on the beach, of course, due to the news, we immediately think about the refugees who are attempting to enter the European Union, who have to cross the Mediterranean Sea with this. And as most of us know, in this year already more than 2,500 people died on their attempt to enter the European Union. They drowned in the Mediterranean Sea, and therefore it became the most dangerous border in the world, actually. So it's the frontier where most of the people were dying in the year 2015. So for some reason it does not respond now anymore. It's very strange. Okay. Okay. Yeah, and this killing of men and women can can effectively be seen as a direct and deliberate act of EU policy. And yeah, these people lying on the beach here, as you can see, they were business youths, and there are different possibilities of how to interpret it or how to analyze these images. I thought through showing people who were business youths on the street there, it might be a possibility also to connect this somehow to those people who are actually responsible for this politics of exclusion, for those politicians in the European Union, which effectively are responsible for this more than 2,500 people who died when they crossed the Mediterranean Sea. And in these images, those people seem to be stranded. So you could imagine a situation when there is maybe an uprising in a situation where the tensions between poor people and rich people in the global north become more intense, and then those people are getting stranded as part of an uprising. They are being thrown overboard. This is actually how it looks in the street there. So you see these large panels. As you see, there's primarily people in cars or also from tram who will watch these panels. And this work relates to other works I have been doing quite recently. So this is a work from 2015 as well, and it shows the German Bundestag, the German Parliament, and as we know, most of these refugees from Syria, they actually plan or have an attempt to come to Germany, and yeah, even though there were some quotes by Angela Merkel recently which were interpreted in a way that refugees are welcome, the politics that exist actually do not really welcome refugees. If these politics would exist, then they would simply go back to what we had in the 1980s or in the early 1990s, when it was simply possible for refugees to apply for asylum in the embassies in the countries in Damascus or in Ankara or in Beirut or wherever. So this was a deliberate attempt also to hinder refugees from entering the European Union. And so this building, the German Bundestag, is covered by an oversized flag with the German colors, black, red, and yellow. And it's combined with a quote by the US-American historian and political scientist Howard Zinn. And this quote reads, I think you can read it, right? But there is not a flag large enough to cover the shame of killing innocent people. It was actually said in another context when the US, during the US bombing of Tripolis in 1986. But when I read this quote later on, I thought that it would also perfectly fit towards this this current situation. And it's also interesting that the flag, until recently, was somehow considered to be a symbol to give shelter for the weaker, and it's now a cloak for hostile human rights decisions cast in a legislative mold. This is the Austrian version of it. As some of you know, I'm based in Vienna, and originally it was also an Austrian piece, so that was carried out a year before in 2014. in public space, and it also exists as a light box, which also leads me towards projects I did already a while ago, which I carried out in Vienna. So the project I'm talking now is from 1997, so it's already 18 years old. And in collaboration with the Austrian artist Martin Krenn, I did a project called Institutional Racism. And it consisted of an exhibition and on 3 by 3 by 3 meter large object in public space in front of the Viennese State Opera. So this object you see here in the middle is the piece Martin Krenn and I did, and you don't see the Viennese State Opera here, but you see here on this image Mozart's selling tickets for an entrance in the Viennese State Opera. The Viennese State Opera would be in the left-hand side of the image. So this is a close-up of the piece. It showed facades from a building from the late 19th century. Such facades, there are several hundreds or probably thousands of these buildings in Vienna, so it's a very typical facade, and no one would actually know to which building this is related to. Therefore, we put a text on this facade, and the text informs us that this building you can see here is actually the facade of a large detention center for refugees in Vienna. And in that time, in 1997, this institution of the detention center for refugees was a quite new institution, and not many people had information about what was going on there and what was the function of it and why these people would be detained there. So what we did is to produce a work that informs about this. It also made a relation to state-regulated racism, as we considered the existence of these institutions as a part of state-regulated racism. It's quite interesting to locate this work also in a larger context, because the year 1997 was the EU year against racism. So when the European Union launches a theme like an EU year against racism, we realize that they have a very particular understanding how they use the term racism. So in more or less all the projects we came to see, and which we could observe through the internet, we realized that it was almost exclusively focusing somehow on xenophobia, and therefore racism was considered to be a problem of right-wing individuals or right-wing groups, fascists, skinheads or whatever. And in our understanding, racism is something that is much more embedded within the structures of nation states, and therefore the attempt of our project was also to relate it more against to the structure, related more to the structure of the nation state. So the text here reads in English. So the text was in English, in German, and in Italian. State racism in Austria. Not far from here, on the Sauerlande, state racism takes shape in form of a prison for remand pending deportation. The only crime of most of the people locked up there, in some cases still minors, is to seek refuge in Austria. They are punished without court proceedings, with up to 6 months imprisonment on the basis of their origin and socially weak status. Remand pending deportation. And the fourth side of this object was designed like an alternative tourist information, and under the headline "Facts Worth Knowing About Austria," it contained further information about the conditions within these detention centers for refugees, which, as I mentioned already, at that time were really not being discussed. Another project I did, again in collaboration with Martin Krenn, is Neues Grenzblatt. It can be translated like a new border magazine or something like this. It's a project which is also part of a larger project titled Border Crossing Services. It was actually looking or focusing on traffickers, on human smugglers, which already at that time were considered as very criminal people. But if we look at how these politics of exclusion function, actually for migrants or for refugees on their attempt to enter the fortress Europe, it's the only way to use the help of these human smugglers, to use the help of these traffickers. Because, as I mentioned, this possibility just to apply for asylum in the embassies did not exist anymore. All the European states decided to abolish this possibility. And all the European states also decided to introduce a law that would put all the expenses on airlines if they bring a refugee who does not have the valid papers, visa or so. Therefore, the airlines all over the world, they look very careful at papers, and if you want to access the Schengen area, they will not allow a refugee to enter because the refugee does not have the required visa. Therefore, the trafficker or the human smuggler is kind of a necessity for the people if they want to enter the European Union. And in German, in the German language, luckily you have a name for trafficking which has a positive connotation. It's Fluchthilfe. For example, during National Socialism, those people who helped the Jews fleeing from National Socialism, they were labeled as Fluchthelfer. And it still has a positive connotation. Also during, when there was a war between Eastern and Western Europe, when people helped people escaping from Eastern Europe, it was also called in Germany or in Austria Fluchthelfer, not Schlepper and Schleuser, which would already have a negative connotation. Actually, this term Fluchthilfe is not being used anymore in a public discourse, but through this project we tried to reintroduce this positively connotated term in order to point to the necessity also of this job, which is usually being described as a criminal activity. Even though criminal activities take place within this job, this cannot be denied. We all know this, but still it has a necessity. And this is the front page of a magazine Martin Krenn and I designed, a Neues Grenzblatt, New Border magazine, which was a direct mailing, which was being sent for free to 15,000 houses on the border region between Austria and Slovenia, which at that time of this project in 2001 was still a Schengen border. And it was still a border where trafficking took place and human smuggling took place. And the magazine, it had something like 20 pages. I have some copies here, so those of you who speak German are welcome to take a copy home with you and to read the texts. There are 8 texts in it, and these texts are from migrant organizations, from anti-racist organizations, from Austria and from Germany. writing about trafficking, about borders and different related things. Yeah, it was also distributed in Vienna, like here on the Maria-Hilfer-Straße in a shopping street with some friends and activists. And there were also quite harsh reactions from the yellow press. So, for example, this is a review from Täglich Alles, which still existed at that time, that wrote in the paper, so in the Neue Grenzblatt, so-called Gutmenschen, good people, praised the activities of criminal smuggling organizations. It is high crime for the public prosecutors to become active here. In paragraph 282, the criminal code threatens with a punishment of as long as 2 years in prison for those who in some form condone legally punishable behavior in a way that is capable of outraging the general sense of what is right and wrong. And smuggling of illegal persons is certainly legally punishable behavior. But maybe human trafficking must not incense us, but rather in leftist style only the closed borders, through which smuggling first became necessary. So this is a text by Kurt Dotzer, who asked the public prosecutors to become active only because this magazine has been produced and distributed. Another project I did in this context is the project, a poster project I did for Minority Report in Aarhus in Denmark. Maybe I should first start that in the year 2000, as some of you might still remember, Austria was the first state in the European Union where the government was built with the inclusion of the very far right-wing FPÖ party. And the second state where the far right wing was included in the government was actually Denmark. And when this became the case, there took place a couple of exhibitions, and to one of these exhibitions in Aarhus, titled Minority Report, Martin Krenn and I were invited, and we were invited to produce something in public space, and we produced a very large poster. And this is actually the place where the poster was presented before it was dismantled by someone whom we never found out who it actually was. But the poster was on a wall which was maybe 4 or 5 meters high, so you needed at least a very high ladder. It was the main square of Aarhus, and the city parliament was just on the opposite of it, which was also the reason why we decided for this highly visible place. There were surveillance cameras everywhere, but for some reason the authorities were not interested to find those person who took up the banner. So we have no image of the work, and at the opening we just presented a wall like this, and we also did all the interviews with the media in front of the wall where the banner was stolen. The only thing that remained was the label of the thing that just mentioned to the title and the artist's name and things like that. So what caused this controversy? Actually, that was the digital file of the banner that was stolen there. I will read it for you in English, so I guess only a few people speak Danish here. The text reads, "The ruling principle of capitalism legitimizes itself by means of two contrary ideologies. On the one hand, the universalistic claim of the competitive society, and on the other hand, racism and sexism. Capitalism's non-redeemable promise of equality is in need of ideologies of inequality like racism. racism makes legitimate the existing relations of inequality in capitalism and therefore contributes to its reproduction. Anti-racist practice should therefore always aim at a demontage of the capitalist system. So it was actually kind of a summary of what you could read in a much more elaborate way in text by Etienne Balibar that somehow referred to racism as a constitutional element of the nation state. And yeah, this is a very condensed form of what could be read in his books. There was a second form of how to present this work, a second format of how we wanted to present this work. Actually, the festival Minority Report, they received, they got the invitation from the city that these city lights, these billboards that are illuminated from the background, could be used by some of the artists for the festival. And the curators of the festival, Donia Nielsen, she decided to give all the city lights to Martin and me for our project. And you would not believe, but also the second part of the project was almost impossible to produce. The posters, they looked like this. They only were in another format, but the text was the same, and also the background was the same. They were already printed, and at one time, a couple of days before the presentation should have taken place, the curator got informed that the city is not capable of installing the posters because they are against the current law. And when the curators asked, oh, what's the problem? Because this is a piece of art, how can this be against the current law? It's just a piece of text, and I mean, it's not no pornography or something like this. Then they referred to their lawyer, and the lawyer of the city council said that it is a copyright violation. It's a copyright violation because we have no right to use the stars of the European Union. As we all know these stars, you can just use Google images and you will find probably 10,000 of modifications of stars of the European Union. It's not something quite special to use these stars also in an artistic context. So they said, in any case, it's impossible to present it. We would need to get a legal permission from the European Union, which we did not have this permission. And it would also be misleading for the audience in Aarhus, because the audience might consider that this interpretation of racism is an official interpretation of the European Union. Of course, we were somehow playing with this, I have to admit. But yeah, it made it a bit complicated to present the work. Then something very interesting happened. We also brought in a lawyer in this, and the lawyers of the two sides, they met. And the astonishing thing was that they made a proposal for a compromise. They made a proposal for a compromise, and it went in this direction that they said, well, you are allowed to present the posters, but you have somehow to modify the stars because they are a logo of the European Union. You're not allowed to take it. But if you would remove some of the stars, it would be possible to present the work. We were very astonished because, of course, we thought it has something to do with the text and not so much with the stars. But yeah, it was really good that the lawyers need. You see here already the intervention. This is just this cheap gaffer tape. You usually use it to fix cables on the floor. And as the posters were already printed and our budget was already spent, we just asked them, yeah, maybe just cover 3 or 4 of these stars, we don't care. And then we made a press release and we introduced this as a kind of a collaboration with the lawyers and the European Union, because that was their idea to cover some of the stars. but it was then actually there in public space, all 80 billboards for, I think, 2 or 3 weeks. Yeah, so this is the last time I did a project here in Prague. I actually showed a 3-channel video installation on the square movements in the Dock Center for Contemporary Art. But I was also invited to do a banner here, and I thought I will also like to present this here, as I think 1/3 in the audience is from Austria. I will also translate this for you in English. The rest of you can for sure read it. Imagine shaking this land from below, steering it up, turning it upside down, to expose all of the plundering and exploitation, and then spreading it out again, without the top and without the bottom, except for its mountains and valleys. And the last project I would like to present is a project I did in collaboration with the Australian artist Sunny Beck, The Rite of Passage. It's a 19-minute long film which I will present. In exhibitions, we presented this film very often in combination with a large wall drawing Sunny Beck carried out, and this is one of these wall drawings. It's an exhibition in Leipzig in the Halle 14, titled To Have and Have Not. And the film is more or less about struggles to obtain citizenship, and also while at the same time struggles about to obtain citizenship, but were also the exclusionary nature of the concept of citizenship is questioned at the same time. So it is this binary approach, and it consists interviews of theorists like Ariella Azzulay or Toni Negri or Sandro Mezzadra, and these interviews are then being combined with local activists in Barcelona that lived under circumstances of that they had no papers, so they were undocumented people at that time when this piece was recorded. And they refer partly to the statements and also talk about their experiences and the concept of citizenship. And yeah, I think I will just present it.
L'immaginario di una cittadinanza globale, che cosa può essere? Evidentemente è l'immaginazione di un mondo senza frontiere, è l'immaginazione di un mondo dove l'eguaglianza reale nel lavoro, nei diritti, sia diventata effettiva.
What we actually have is a population of governed people. The governed people, some of them are according citizenship by the state, and some others are deprived of citizenship. The legacy of the nation state is that the citizens' population is governed with an extra, superfluous population, as Hannah Arendt defined it very clearly already in the 40s. We tend to think about this population as external, but this population is not external to the regime that we have to analyze. It is always included in the political space of these regimes.
de nosotros, lo que sentimos, el conjunto del África negro, al África subsahariano, no sentimos ni persona aquí. Porque yo cuando llego con papeles, eso es lo que te piden, que sea legal. Pero cuando salgo a la calle me controlan más de 20 veces al día. Igual que el que no está legal. Y la gente, cuando cerca, todo el mundo con los bolsillos y tirando su maleta, y hasta a veces tú te vas de buena gente de ayudar a una persona y te responde de una forma que tú vas a robarlo.
In the last 2 centuries, Europe and the West, citizenship has been actually linked in a very strict way with the nation state. I don't think it is particularly easy to disentangle citizenship from this history, and more generally from a history that has always been shaped by exclusion. Nevertheless, citizenship has been also important in the language, in the history, in practices of emancipation in Europe and beyond Europe.
Le questioni che vengono proposte qui, quali sarebbero i possibili protagonisti di una cittadinanza globale. I protagonisti della cittadinanza globale non possono che essere, diciamo così, le nuove avanguardie del lavoro produttivo, e cioè fondamentalmente dotate di flessibilità e mobilità essenziale. Poi la mia convinzione è che l'elemento assolutamente fondamentale che sempre di più ha condizionato il discorso sulla cittadinanza, e sulla cittadinanza non semplicemente come categoria di partecipazione a un popolo, ma come criterio mobile di apertura o chiusura delle frontiere, da un lato il mercato del lavoro, le esigenze del mercato del lavoro, e dall'altro le esigenze di sostegno o di allargamento, di approfondimento del welfare in relazione ai ritmi demografici.
Se vive, yo creo que en una constante bipolaridad, porque por un lado somos sujetos, somos humanos, somos personas y no somos fantasmas que andamos deambulando sin que nuestro caminar no tenga un impacto, ¿no? Sin embargo, hay unas leyes, unas normas que estructuralmente te quieren invisibilizar, te quieren olvidar, te quieren hacer creer que no existen. Pero por otro lado, en el mismo momento en que ellos te anulan, les eres importante pues para la fuerza de trabajo, y hay como este doble discurso, ¿no? Para recibir derechos necesitas papeles, pero para ser explotado sí existes, ellos lo saben, y para seguir viviendo en esa precariedad, y además para que nunca intentes llegar a tener la condición legal que te dé acceso a esos papeles.
En realidad hay como distintos grados de no reconocimiento de ciudadanía, ¿no? Uno es estar sin papeles, otro es estar, por ejemplo, con un permiso de estudiante de 1 año, otro es estar con una residencia de 5 años, y en los distintos grados pues se tiene distintas como posibilidades de moverse y no moverse en la ciudad, ¿no? Cuando no estás con papeles, por ejemplo, en mi caso, prefería no salir a manifestaciones, obviamente no podías viajar. Si en caso alguna persona en tu país, pues algún familiar le pasaba algo, no podías volver porque tenías el problema de que después te ponen el castigo de 10 años sin poder entrar a la Unión Europea, ¿no? Y después, una vez que ya tienes la documentación o si tienes el permiso de estudiante, igual siempre hay el riesgo de que si cometes algún tipo de infracción, eso va a contar en tu expediente. Entonces, por ende, puede ser que no te renueven el visado o el permiso de estadía por cualquier infracción que hayas cometido, ¿no?
Come si fa a dare uno schema giuridico che metta cittadinanza appunto a queste nuove dimensioni del rapporto globale? Evidentemente nessuno di noi può saperlo, è chiaro, dico, che le nazioni sono già state superate da questo punto di vista. Quando rientra il motivo nazionale è sempre in termini repressivi e reazionari. Ma detto questo non si è risolto nulla, perché bisognerebbe invece riuscire a capire come una governance effettiva dei movimenti di cittadinanza, di cittadini per la cittadinanza, ecco, diventa reale. E questo è un processo da sviluppare in termini che non vengano appunto lasciati semplicemente all'impresa, perché lì si troverà sempre di fronte al dispotismo delle regole di mercato, ecco, e che non venga abbandonato appunto così all'anarchia dei rapporti sociali, un'anarchia che non può che essere tu sei svizzero, io sono italiano, l'altro è francese, l'altro è nigeriano, l'altro è kazako e l'altro è filippino.
No es una cosa que uno lo va a sentir o uno lo vas a vivir, no. Aquí yo creo que a veces para vivirlo mejor hay que olvidarse la piel que tiene, porque siempre te miran y te lo dicen en los ojos o en las caras o en las palabras. Porque yo llevo aquí más de 16 años y yo me veo igual que lo que han venido ayer.
We have to think about global citizenship because our world became global and because we are abused by the political power, by the political sovereign power all over the world. And the way that we are trying to evade these zones or this island of abuse by the sovereign power doesn't mean that we are protected from the abuses of the sovereign power. So we have to think about global citizenship as the only way to resist the sovereign power, the existing sovereign power of the nation state.
Yo creo que vivir acá sin ser ciudadano, para mí personalmente es una experiencia muy mezclada. O sea, en un sentido así, tengo una rabia, o sea, una rabia real de no poder disfrutar de todo lo que es el sistema de bienestar. Pero al mismo tiempo, o sea, es confuso porque al mismo tiempo así disfruto de ciertos así privilegios de la ciudadana, sin ser ciudadano, por ser blanco, por ser de nacionalidad gringo, me da un privilegio así de moverme, o sea que puedo entrar y salir la mayoría del tiempo sin ninguna pregunta. Y bueno, no sé, o sea que también me da rabia del hecho de que existe este tipo de privilegio, de un sistema que por tanto que hay gente que no tiene papeles, que mismo dentro de esa dinámica de no tener papeles hay una jerarquía, hay un sistema de los que igualmente disfrutan de ciertos privilegios.
Creo que sí, que el concepto de ciudadanía incluye a los no ciudadanos, así como el concepto de poder incluye a los que no tienen poder, y así como, por ejemplo, existe el arte porque hay una serie de cuestiones que no son arte. O sea, son como categorías que son necesarias y son términos o situaciones que son bastante interdependientes, como todos los binarismos. El término ciudadanía es un término que a mí no me interpela en lo más mínimo, si tengo que pensar que, por ejemplo, las mujeres no eran ciudadanas hasta hace 200 años atrás en la cultura occidental, pues es un concepto con el cual no puedo adherir, ¿no? Es un concepto muy cerrado, muy excluyente, y dentro de ese ámbito, pues a mí la noción de ciudadanía no me sirve como herramienta para referirme a nada, ni como categoría.
In the discussion on cosmopolitanism, the critical point has often been made that cosmopolitanism is cold and abstract, while the nation is warm and very concrete. Scholars of migration who have worked with such a concept as transnationalism have emphasized that migrants are continuously building and rebuilding transnational social spaces that work as the spatial coordinates of their everyday experience. It is a concrete experience that has very much to say about the way in which experience and imagination cooperate in producing new scales of social, political, economical, cultural experience beyond the national space of citizenship.
Pues no solo mueve colores, sabores, olores y cuerpos, sino que también mueven maneras de interpretar el mundo, maneras de organizarse y maneras también de lucha y de resistir, ¿no? Entonces, yo sí creo que es una riqueza que poblaciones con historias, digamos, tan políticamente activas como en América Latina y en otras zonas, en África, donde permanentemente están construyendo y reafirmando su identidad, pues eso ha generado que aquí en Barcelona el abanico, digamos, de luchas y de posibilidades de resistencia se haya ampliado, ¿no? No quiero decir que así sea para toda la población, pero es evidente que es algo que ellos tampoco pueden controlar, ¿no? Porque finalmente te das cuenta que entre el inmigrante, el precario, el pobre, pues hay muchos vínculos de subsistencia y que tiene que ver con resolver las necesidades básicas.
Quindi non si può, credo, immaginare la cittadinanza, una cittadinanza globale, comunque un concetto di cittadinanza dinamica, ecco, se non si pensa anche proprio a questa cosa, non semplicemente in termini di diritto, ma in termini di economia politica, di corpo, ecco, così che si trasferisce. Devono esistere strutture che ricevono, che sanno ospitare questo tipo di movimento. Questo elemento per cui la cittadinanza non è semplicemente un fenomeno soggettivo, ma è anche un fenomeno, per così dire, oggettivo, tra virgolette, tra guillemets, ecco, di ospitalità. Oggi quello che è un po' assurdo è che ci troviamo di fronte a quello che era il capitalismo all'inizio, dispotismo all'interno della fabbrica e anarchia nella società. Mutatis mutandis, cioè cambiato tutto quello che deve essere cambiato, e considerando l'impresa oggi non più semplicemente fabbrica, ma come grandi strutture metropolitane o, se si vuole, grandi spazi governati dall'industria, oggi abbiamo giustamente di nuovo questo schema, dispotismo capitalistico all'interno e anarchia all'esterno.
En Barcelona, los procesos de integración hacia la población de afuera, lo que intentan es justamente integrarlos bajo la idea de que acepten sus normas, sus reglas, su cultura, y que tú te deshagas de lo que traes. Pero en la realidad no es así. Y lo que ha pasado ahí es que en lugar de que Barcelona los transformara, estas poblaciones han transformado esos barrios.
So it looks like we still have some time for a few questions. So in case you would like to ask something, you can do it. And Oliver tries to respond. Any questions from the audience? Or you can also ask later on. We will be around for the whole afternoon panel.
Why do you say you choose Barcelona as a point of departure? You could do also Calais or another port.
Right, yeah.
And then the people you choose, you have Anthony Negri, and you say something about the selection of older voices and speakers.
Yeah. So the process of the work is that I worked on it for quite a long time. So I started already to work on it like in 2010 or so. I did some of these interviews with theorists just when I happened to meet with interesting people I thought who would be perfectly to be included in a project. At the very beginning I thought I would do an entire project primarily focusing on the discourse that does not really yet exist, but which I also tried that I could push a bit forwards in its existence through it on global citizenship. But then it shifted a bit to citizenship and a critique of citizenship in general. So when I collected something like 7 or 8 interviews with theorists, I only decided to use them 3 in the film, and it would have been possible to produce a film based on these interviews with the theorists. But having the interviews, I also felt that it should go beyond. And it somehow has to be related really with those people who live without papers, who are being illegalized by the system, undocumented migrants. And I was discussing at that time with Zanny Beck which city to choose, because it was clear that we would do it in one city. And then she happened to get an artist residency in Barcelona. So it was on the one hand just an easy way of us how we cheaply could produce it, just because she was based there for half a year in Barcelona. And on the other hand, also we recorded it at the very beginning of 2013 in Spain, which was really at the brink of the crisis, I would say. So it was clear that their banks needed to be bailed out, and it was not clear what exactly the effects of this bailout of bank would be in terms of austerity and so ever for the people who actually live in Spain. And usually tensions increase in such a situation when the social systems get diminished. So we thought it would be a super interesting context for such a project. And yeah, unfortunately the quality of the screening is not really excellent here because there's a lot of light flooding in from all sides, because as you realize the film is more or less one which is very dark. More or less everything which was recorded at night. So if you see it in a black cube or in a cinema presentation, then you can see all these nuances from black, and I think there's much more information in the film, so it was a bit of a pity for me to see it like this now. But I still hope it's possible to get the core content of the film. It was a quite clear decision also to make invisible, with one exception, the theorists, and to make visible the people who are usually being kept invisible. So to reverse this, I think that's clear.
The film is available also online, isn't it?
In the meantime, it's also available online, yeah. So.
Any other comments or questions? In that case, I thank you very much for your attention. Thank you for coming, and thank you, Oliver, for the presentation.
Yeah, thank you.